There are legends who rise, there are icons who reign, and then there is Madonna, a woman who did not simply change pop music. She rewrote the rules of what a woman was allowed to be. Tonight we step into the life of the artist the world calls the Queen of Pop. But before the glitter, before the shock, before the empire she built with nothing but defiance and a microphone, there was a moment last year that made the world hold its breath. A woman who once danced across the biggest stages on Earth was found unconscious, fighting a dangerous infection that nearly claimed her life. 65 years old, surrounded by machines, a body that had survived 40 years of world tours, controversies, heartbreaks, and unimaginable pressure had finally collapsed. And yet, when she opened her eyes, the first words she whispered were not about fear, they were about returning to the stage. Because for Madonna, survival has always been a performance. Not a performance for applause, but for freedom. Before she became the most talked about woman on the planet. Before the scandals that shook the Vatican. Before the albums that set the world on fire. There was a little girl from Michigan who learned too early that life could break your heart long before you were old enough to understand why. A 5-year-old standing in a quiet house, listening to the sound of a mother who would never come back. A silence so deep it shaped her destiny. A loss so sharp it would become the fire behind every boundary she ever shattered. This is where her story truly begins. Not on a stage, not under a spotlight, but in the dark room, where a child first learned that the world does not save you, you save yourself. And from that moment, Madonna decided she would never let anyone decide who she could be ever again. Before the world knew her name, she was simply Madonna Louise Ciccone, a small girl in a quiet Michigan neighborhood. The houses looked peaceful from the outside, with trimmed lawns and clean windows, but inside her home, a storm was waiting. Her mother, Madonna Fortin Ciccone, was the center of the family. Gentle, devoted, a woman whose presence held everything together. But when little Madonna was only 5 years old, that presence began to fade. The illness came quietly at first, then stole her mother piece by piece. Cancer does not ask permission. It simply takes. One morning, the house was silent in a way that did not feel real. Her father stood still, unable to speak. Her brothers and sisters cried in separate corners. And Madonna, small and confused, kept waiting for a voice she would never hear again. That day carved itself into her bones. Without a mother, she became a child who watched instead of spoke. A child who searched for warmth in a house, suddenly cold. A child who prayed to a God she did not understand, wondering why heaven had chosen her family to break apart. As she grew older, the grief changed shape. It turned into a hunger for control in a world that had taken everything from her. It grew into a rebellion against silence, against obedience, against any rule that told her what she could or could not be. She danced harder. She studied fiercely. She pushed every boundary placed before her. Teachers called her gifted. Others called her difficult. But no one understood that she was building armor around a wound that never healed. And yet, as strong as she became, her heart was still searching. Searching for a place where loss could not reach her. Searching for a life bigger than the quiet pain of Michigan. She would soon discover that such a place existed. A place loud enough to drown her memories. A place cruel enough to break her again, but powerful enough to remake her. New York City. In the summer of 1978, Madonna stepped off a bus in New York City with $35 in her pocket and a hunger that no one her age should ever have carried. New York did not welcome her. It swallowed her whole. The sidewalks trembled with noise. The subways smelled of metal and danger. Sirens echoed through the night, like warnings whispered by the city itself. But Madonna did not flinch. She looked at the chaos around her and whispered almost to herself, "This is where I start." She rented a cramped room in an old building that shook every time a train passed. The walls were thin, the air was damp, and the nights were colder than she expected. Some evenings she slept in all her clothes because she had no heat. Other nights she lay awake, listening to footsteps in the hallway, hoping none of them stopped at her door. She worked wherever she could. A waitress, a dancer, a model for art classes. Anything that paid enough to keep her alive until the next sunrise. She practiced dance until her legs trembled. She wrote songs on scraps of paper. She rehearsed in studios she could barely afford. and she pushed herself so relentlessly that even her friends whispered she was chasing something no ordinary person could see. There were moments of fear, too. She was robbed. She was followed. Her apartment was broken into more than once. But every time the city tried to crush her, she rose with sharper edges. New York was unforgiving, but Madonna was learning to be the same. Then slowly cracks of light appeared. A connection in a small club. A song created with friends. The discovery that she had a voice that did not simply sing. It commanded. And in the heart of the city that tried to break her, Madonna found the first spark of the fire that would one day set the entire world ablaze. By 1984, the girl who once slept in a freezing New York apartment was standing on the edge of a moment that would change pop culture forever. Her name was rising. Her energy was electric. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared the world for what Madonna did next. When she released the album Like a Virgin, she did not just climb the charts, she detonated them. Then came the performance. The MTV stage glowed under soft pink lights. A giant wedding cake stood at the center. And from the top, like a storm in lace and pearls, Madonna emerged. A white wedding dress. A belt that read, "Boy Toy." A voice that carried innocence, wrapped inside rebellion. She rolled on the stage floor. She touched her body with the confidence of a woman who refused to be ashamed. Every movement shattered a rule. Every lyric erased another line society had drawn for women. Millions of viewers watched in shock. Some were mesmerized. Some were horrified. But no one could look away. She was not simply performing. She was declaring war on the idea that a woman's purity defined her power. Overnight, Madonna became a global phenomenon. Teens copied her style. Parents complained about her influence. Religious groups protested outside record stores. And she looked at the chaos she created and smiled. Because for the first time in her life, she was not the girl searching for a voice. She was the woman shaping the voice of a generation. But what the world did not know was that Madonna was only getting started. If Like a Virgin shook the planet, her next move would ignite a storm so fierce that even the Vatican would rise to stop her. By 1989, Madonna was no longer just a superstar. She was a force of nature. Every song she released rewrote the conversation about music, gender, and power. But nothing she had ever done could compare to the fire she was about to walk into. Like a prayer. It began with a gospel choir echoing like a prayer for redemption. But the music video, that was something entirely different. Something the world had never seen. A burning cross lighting the night sky. A saint portrayed by a black actor. A woman seeking truth in a world stained by injustice. A story that blended faith, race, and desire into a single explosive vision. The moment it aired, the world erupted. Religious leaders condemned it as blasphemy. Churches called for boycotts. Parents demanded the video be banned. The Vatican itself spoke out against her. Imagine this, a pop star in her early 30s, standing alone in front of the most powerful religious institution in the world. And she did not apologize. She did not retreat. She stood taller. Because Madonna was fighting a battle that stretched far beyond music. She was challenging centuries of silence. She was forcing the world to ask uncomfortable questions about faith, authority, and who has the right to speak. The backlash came fast. Pepsi canceled her brand new multi-million-dollar campaign and pulled her commercial from the air. News anchors debated her morality every night. Crowds protested outside theaters. But through it all, Madonna remained unshaken. "This is my truth," she said. And art must never fear the truth. What the world did not realize was that this was only the first act of her war against the boundaries placed on women. Because just 3 years later, she would push not only religion, but society itself to its breaking point. A storm was coming. A storm named erotica. By 1992, Madonna had stood against religion, society, and every rule ever written for women in the entertainment industry. But what she was about to do next would not just break boundaries. It would burn them to ashes. The album was called Erotica. And the book was simply Sex. Two works released side by side, built on the same message: desire is not a crime, and a woman's body does not belong to anyone but herself. The world was not ready. The album opened with the whisper of a dominatrix. The beats were dark, hypnotic, pulsing with the confidence of someone who had stopped asking for permission long ago. But the real shock came with the book. A metallic cover, photographs shot with brutal honesty, images exploring fantasy, domination, vulnerability, and freedom. A pop star embracing sexuality not as entertainment but as art. Stores locked it behind counters. Libraries refused to carry it. Governments in several countries attempted to ban it. Critics called her obscene. Many declared her career finished. For the first time, the attacks felt personal. They did not call her controversial. They called her dangerous. Madonna stood in the center of the firestorm and did not blink. She insisted sexuality was a part of human truth. She argued that shame was a cage built by society, and she refused to step inside it. But the price was heavy. Album sales were lower than expected. The media turned against her. Talk shows mocked her. Some fans walked away. For the first time in years, Madonna found herself standing alone. This was the darkest moment of her career. Not because of scandal, but because the world she had dominated was suddenly pushing her away. Yet within that darkness, something else was forming. Something quiet, something powerful. A rebirth. And when it arrived, it would lift her from the ashes and carry her to the greatest artistic triumph of her life. After the firestorm of erotica and the shadows cast by the sex book, Madonna walked into the mid-1990s, carrying scars the world could not see. She had spent years fighting, shouting, defending, provoking. And suddenly, one day, she fell silent. Not defeated, transformed. Motherhood softened her edges. Spirituality opened a door she never knew existed. And from the quiet spaces of self-reflection, a new Madonna began to rise. Then came 1998. The year she released Ray of Light. From the first note, it felt different. The sound was cleaner, wiser, almost celestial. It was not the voice of a rebel crashing into the world. It was the voice of a woman who had walked through storms and come out glowing. Critics who once attacked her suddenly praised her. Fans who had drifted away returned. She won Grammys. She earned respect from an industry that once doubted she could survive her own fire. But more importantly, she rediscovered herself. She learned how to breathe again, how to forgive herself for the battles she lost, how to love without fear of being broken. Yet while her music softened, her life behind the curtains grew more complicated. Relationships cracked, rumors swirled. Her heart, once guarded by defiance, became vulnerable again. There was a man she loved. There was a family she built with hope. There was a future she believed would last. But love is not always kind. And the next chapter of Madonna's life would not be written with music, but with the sound of a home slowly falling apart. When Madonna met filmmaker Guy Ritchie, she believed she had finally found something she had been chasing her entire life. Not fame, not power, but a steady place to land. They married in 2000. A quiet ceremony in a Scottish castle, surrounded by family, friends, and the fragile hope that this time love would stay. Together, they raised 2 sons. Rocco, their child, by blood. David, the little boy she adopted from Malawi, whose smile reminded her of every second chance life had ever given her. For a while, it worked. The world saw photographs of a family that looked warm, complete, almost magical. But behind closed doors, the cracks began forming. Schedules pulled them apart. Pressure tightened around them like a fist. Arguments grew louder than laughter. By 2008, the marriage had unraveled. The divorce became a battlefield illuminated by flashbulbs. Madonna lost a portion of her wealth, but that was not what broke her. It was the thought of losing time with her sons. And then, in 2016, the wound reopened when Rocco, now a teenager, chose to live with his father in London. It was a decision shaped by distance, growing pains, and the storm of their broken home. But to Madonna, it felt like losing him all over again. On stage during her tour, she sometimes paused mid-song, her voice trembling as she told the audience, "There is no love stronger than a mother's love." People heard a pop star speak, but behind the lights, a mother was pleading for her child. The court battles were long, the headlines were cruel, and each day Madonna stood in the middle of it trying to protect what remained of her family. But while the world focused on her private pain, another storm was forming. A storm built not from love, but from the anger of millions of strangers ready to judge her once again. What came next would drag Madonna into a war that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with her existence. As the years passed, Madonna learned something that few icons ever fully understand. The world may adore you, but the world can also turn on you without mercy. Every time she stepped on a stage, she carried not only her microphone, but the weight of millions of opinions pressed against her skin. Her political statements became headlines. Her support for the LGBTQ community sparked both praise and fury. Her use of religious imagery, even decades after Like a Prayer, continued to irritate those who believed art should stay obedient. And when she grew older, the criticism took on a sharper edge. People questioned her clothes, her dances, her romances, her decisions as a mother, her right to still express herself with the same fire she had at 25. Some called her desperate. Some claimed she was clinging to youth. But Madonna knew the truth. She was not trying to be young. She was trying to stay free. Then came the adoption controversies in Malawi. She had opened her heart to children who needed a home, but instead of gratitude, many accused her of exploiting legal loopholes. She insisted she followed the laws. She insisted her intentions were pure. But the noise grew louder than her voice. The media painted her as a woman addicted to attention, unable to age gracefully. Yet none of those people understood the woman behind the flashes. A woman shaped by loss. A woman who had fought her entire life to control her own narrative. Still, the attacks did not stop. And as she entered her 60s, the harshest blow of all came from the one thing no human being can escape: her own body. It would happen suddenly, loudly, and nearly cost her life. By the time Madonna reached 65, she was no longer simply an artist. She was history, a living monument to rebellion, courage, and the relentless pursuit of her own truth. But even monuments can crack. In the summer of 2023, the news broke. Madonna had been rushed to the hospital, a severe bacterial infection, unconscious, placed in the intensive care unit, with her life hanging by a thread. For a world that had watched her defy time, gravity, and every rule ever created, the silence was terrifying. Fans gathered outside the hospital. Messages flooded the internet. People who once mocked her suddenly prayed for her, because in that moment, everyone understood something they had forgotten. Madonna was human. A human being who had spent 4 decades carrying the expectations of an entire planet. Doctors fought to stabilize her. Family members whispered her name through tears. Tour plans were halted. The world waited. And then, as she had done every time life tried to break her, Madonna opened her eyes. Her first words were not about fear, not about pain. She asked about the tour. She asked when she could go back on stage. Even with a weakened body, she forced herself to stand, to walk, to reclaim her strength inch by inch. Because for Madonna, the stage is not a place. It is a pulse, a heartbeat, a reminder that she is still alive. Months later, when she returned to rehearsals, her team stood in awe as she danced slower but determined, her eyes burning with the same fire she carried at 20. She smiled and said quietly, "I am not done." And the truth is, she never will be. Not while her voice still rises, not while her story still inspires, not while millions still echo her message that freedom belongs to those brave enough to fight for it. Madonna has lived through grief, poverty scandals, heartbreaks, battles with institutions, and now the betrayal of her own body. But she continues to rise, again, and again, and again. And that's why the world doesn't call her a legend. The world calls her a queen.